All right, there we go. Well, hey everyone, I'm Guil. I'm a software development instructor at Treehouse. At Treehouse, you can learn front-end web development, full-stack JavaScript, UX design, Python, PHP, and lots more. You can check all that out at teamtreehouse.com. There's even a 7-day free trial to get you started. I mainly teach full-stack JavaScript and front-end web development, but CSS is probably my favorite topic to talk about and present. So I'm really excited to be here today talking a little bit about how to help make your style sheets less repetitive, more modular, themable, maintainable, and so much more with CSS variables. We also have a Treehouse staff moderating the chat. So if you have any questions about Treehouse or this presentation, feel free to ask away and they will send those questions my way. Cool. So a little bit about this live stream today. I'm here in my screencasting closet at home, but hey, you know. So in this session, we're going to look at a few things, right? How to use CSS variables to reuse values. We're going to explore the dynamic capabilities of CSS variables. We'll look at how to scope them to selectors and also perform simple calculations with variables in the CSS calc function. Some other really neat stuff like getting and setting values with JavaScript. That's probably my favorite part. Also using them with SVG. So a couple other things, some best practices and some things to maybe avoid while using them. We'll have a look at a few helpful slides to get us started and then get into some live code demos. Sound good? Cool. So let's get started. So many of you have probably experienced the repetitive and sort of maintenance nightmare nature CSS could be. Not always, but at times, right? Maintaining it could be pretty cumbersome and tedious. Now, if you've been using a CSS preprocessor like Sass or Less, you're already used to declaring variables to store and keep track of values in your style sheets. It's a core feature of those preprocessors, right? Well, for some time now, we've been able to use CSS variables directly in CSS. They're technically called custom properties, as you can see here, but many developers just call them CSS variables. I will too for most of this live stream. That's what I will roll with. But like, variables in preprocessors, CSS variables at the heart, they hold references to values you can reuse throughout your style sheets, right? But there's plenty of differences and also advantages to using CSS variables over preprocessor variables. Now, just to get us started with the syntax for custom properties / variables, it can feel a little funky, a little squishy at first, right? With the 2 dashes in front of the property name. But they do look and work like regular CSS property value pairs once you get to know them. The dashes in front of the name, what it does is it automatically identifies it as a variable to the browser, right? You make up the name and assign it a value. Then you use this var CSS function to sort of reference the value, reference the property name rather, and use its assigned value in your style sheet. So yeah, let's get into how these work by looking at some example code first, and then we'll get into some live demos. So first, you need to declare a variable, right? A CSS variable inside an element. And you'll often declare properties that are going to be referenced by many elements like your main brand colors or your layout styles. You'll declare those, let's say on the root element, right? Using this root pseudo class. And what this does is it scopes the variables to the highest level in the CSS cascade. And what that does is it makes them available globally, right? So in other words, the values can be inherited by pretty much all the elements. And again, the var function here calls the value of a CSS variable, and var can be used in place of any CSS value. So for example, here we are assigning a color and background color property. We're assigning the value with var. Now with var in place, anytime you change the value of a CSS variable up here in the root scope, the change is going to get passed along to pretty much all uses of the variable. And it makes the process of writing and maintaining CSS a little easier and less error prone, right? So yeah, with variables in place, it's kind of like JavaScript all up in your CSS right here. Yeah, so you can use multiple variables to update properties that take more than one value, or you can even update properties that accept an unknown argument list. Like with CSS gradients in this case, so we have this background image property that has a linear gradient, and it has two values to create those color stops, and they're defined using variables. So these variables that are defined up here in the root scope. And it's also possible to assign a value to a variable using other variables, and this can be really useful when you need multiple color values to create a gradient, for example. So here we have this gradient variable declared up in the root scope, and it has two comma-separated values that are defined with CSS variables. So it's pulling in these color BG and color BG light variables. And then down here in the header's linear gradient, it's calling this gradient custom property here to create the nice gradient. Yeah, you can also use variables for font stacks, layout styles, and so on and so on and so on to avoid code duplication. This isn't terribly exciting or earth-shattering yet, right? Because we've been able to do similar things with CSS preprocessors and tools like PostCSS for a while now. But it turns out that you can, CSS variables can do a whole lot more than just be placeholders for colors, font sizes, or any CSS value really. CSS variables, have dynamic capabilities, and you can do many, many things that you can't do with preprocessors. So what do I mean by that? Well, for starters, preprocessors, Sass and less, right? They don't run in the browser. The variables you declare when you're writing Sass just live in a source file. And then the preprocessors, they just replace variables with static values when they're compiled to CSS. Also, the browser itself doesn't know anything about the actual variables you're writing, and those variables themselves don't know anything about your DOM structure, right? They're kind of decoupled in a way. Now, on the other hand, CSS variables, they are entirely more flexible than compiled code, right? Because they're native to the browser, right? They're alive in the browser, which means that when you update the value of a CSS variable, the browser is going to update it anywhere it's referenced at runtime or computed value time. And this is what gives them dynamic capabilities and opens up lots of interesting possibilities in just replacing colors and font size values and so on. The value of a CSS variable can actually be updated, for example, from within the scope of a media query. And you can't really do that with preprocessors. So let's have a go at a demo. And I'll bring up my text editor here and open up my first set of files. So yeah, I have an HTML file here. And in a style tag, I've added some boilerplate CSS to get us started. But in the body of the page, we have a headline and two columns below it. This is kind of what it looks like now. So let's open up a CSS file. So here in the CSS, I'll start by scoping a variable named margin size to the root element. So let's do -- margin size, and I'll set it to 0.5 em initially. And right below these headline and column selectors, I'll give the headline a margin bottom property, and let's give the columns a margin left property. And then I'm going to reference this margin size custom property or variable for each of the values. So for the headline, let's say margin bottom var, and here I'll call up -- margin size. And then in this column adjacent selector here, we'll do var, a new root context that's going to update the value of that margin size variable at each breakpoint. So for example, here at the 640 pixel breakpoint, I will update the value of margin size. So I'll exaggerate the values here so you can really see how this works. I'll update the value of the margin size variable here to, let's say, 2.5 em. And just below at the 1024 pixel breakpoint, let's update it to 5 em. So notice how I'm only including the root selector scope and the updated variables, right? I'm not, writing the headline or column selectors here or the actual margin bottom and margin left CSS properties that reference the variable, just the variable. So the cool thing is, I'll bring up the browser, is that that margin size value of the headline, so this is the headline here, and the columns are going to be updated live at each breakpoint, right? So the CSS variable is sort of responsive to each breakpoint right there at runtime. You can't quite do this as easily with just Sass or less. So simple, but pretty cool. Let me update my screen here. Cool. So back to the, and if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat. I'm getting some questions already, and I'll pause, before the next demo, let's say, and answer some questions. Cool. So this is a really good one that's kind of relevant to what I'm doing now. So do you always declare the variables in the root? Actually, not always, and I'm going to get into that next. So great question. Yes, there are other options for declaring your variables. All right. So getting to that part, while using root is a great way to set global variables, right? And keep track of all your variables in one place for easy maintenance, for example. You don't always need to declare your variables inside the root scope. You can do it in other places too, right? You could declare them really at any point in your CSS file, and they'll live within the scope in which they're specified. And this is because, as I've mentioned, CSS variables, they behave like regular CSS properties. So that means they inherit, they cascade, and they can be declared on or scoped to any selector. So for instance, here's another slide with code. We have this base class of button, right? And that uses var to set a background color of a button. Whoops. So then right below we have these button modifier classes, right? And button callout and button info. And here, right, these scopes are declaring new values for the button BG variable. And the markup might look something like this, right? It's let's say 2 anchor elements. One has the class list button callout, the other button info. Now, instead of defining the BG button variable at the top in the root scope, like before, we declare it on the button modifier classes only and assign the values there, right? So these modifier selectors themselves provide a new scope, and each scope updates that button BG variable that's being pulled up here in the button rule. And yeah, it's really cool that the browser updates its value based on just the class or the DOM element the variable is scoped to. So it's pretty neat. As you can see here, we have the the different callout button and then the info button. And yeah, so scoping CSS variables to DOM elements gives us really even more interesting possibilities and provides an easier, sort of more logical way of defining component variations. Since CSS variables, as I showed you, follow the rules of the CSS cascade and inheritance, we can style elements based on where they appear in the DOM, right? So in other words, you can effectively set how an element looks when it's inside another element. So for example, to update the styles again of a button based on, let's say, whether it appears inside a cart item, a modal window, some banner element, you might create descendant or child selectors like these. We probably create selectors like these all the time. Well, with CSS variables, you can update the styles of the button without having to write these kind of selectors that couple your CSS to your DOM. And this can make components completely extensible. So let's have a look at another demo. Bring up my text editor. Var scope. All right, so first up, again, I have some boilerplate CSS here in my index.html file. But down below in the body, we have these different example scopes, right? We have this div with the class banner, then one with the class card, and one with the class modal. And they each have an anchor element inside them with the class button. Now over in style.css, I'll again declare, the regular CSS properties whose values I want to update inside the button rule here. So let's do font size, and below that, background color. So as their values, I'll define var, and let's do a CSS variable here for font size, like dash dash button font size. And for the background color, let's do var dash dash button BG. My laptop sounds like it's about to just take off the fan, so I apologize if it's loud. I'll move the mic away from it a little bit. Cool, so that looks good. So, then I want to update how the button appears, right, inside the element with the class banner, card, and modal. So what I'll do is I'll set and scope CSS variables on just these selectors only, right? So let's do dash dash button font size, and I'll set it here to, let's say, 1.25M. And the other one's button BG, so let's update that. And I'll set a hex value here. Let's say C44A79. Let's update the card. Make this size a little smaller. Let's say 1.15M. And change up the background to 29AB E6. And finally, the modal, the parent modal class, let's say a little smaller, 1M. And a fancy hex color here of 25ABAA. Sweet. All right, so what's happening here? Well, each of these selectors is creating a new context for the variables with different values. So now, any button children of the banner, card, modal elements is going to inherit these variable values. So here, again, the button class descendants of banner, card, and modal inherit the property set on them on their parents, and that renders 3 different buttons, right? Just from one set of CSS variables. So it's a pretty flexible approach, right? And this is really one of the best use cases for CSS variables, theming, and often using them for design systems. You can create and apply color themes, control your type scale, spacing scale, and really more just from one place, essentially. All right, cool. So I'm getting some questions here. What are you making? Can you show us? This is just a little snippet from, let's say, a button set that is, you might have a button again in a banner or a card or a modal. This might be an older question. Hopefully I covered that part. But yeah, it's just an example of how you can basically change the color of a button based on where it's defined, right? The style that is given to its parent, the button then inherits those styles with variables. When using CSS variables, I know they used to show up as errors when you test it in your code in a CSS validator. Does this happen? Only if it, small syntactic things like the variable name, you come up with them yourself. Like if it's a property, right, that might show up because it's a property, it's a CSS native property. But custom variables, only like little syntax things, like if you're missing the dashes and those kinds of things. I believe. I really haven't dealt with the validator and CSS variables recently, but since. Cool. So that wraps up this demo. Let me go back to my trusty slides. All right. Next up, you can perform simple calculations using CSS variables, right? And a handy use case is using the CSS calc function to perform calculations that determine and build your length values. That's really neat. So for example, to manage margins in your layout, here I'm using calc. Whoops. So here I'm using calc and variables to build pixel and m values, right? So it's multiplying this margin size variable declared up here That's 2 initially, so it's multiplying it here by 10 pixels, and then 1em here to produce margin values for, let's say, an image and a headline. Now, CSS variables are not only updated using the cascade and inheritance, you can also read and write or get and set CSS variable values from your JavaScript, and this is where things start to get really interesting. So let's look at some demos. So first, I have a video up here showing what I'm going to create. So there's a circle, a ball. It's moving around the page using a CSS transform. And based on where you click in the body, its color changes to a different value, and it moves to where you click. So the background color and transform properties of this ball are being updated at runtime with JavaScript and CSS variables. Now, the way CSS variables interact with JavaScript is with 2 methods. We have get property value and set property. And so yeah, the get property value gets the value of a CSS variable, and set property sets the value. So let's look at how these work. Let's bring this up here. All right, so in a style sheet, we first use CSS variables to, in this ball rule here, I've already defined them. So I defined CSS variables to define the background color of the ball, as well as the XY translation or position values of the ball in pixels. This was all created with the CSS calc function using some of the techniques I just showed you. So, oh yeah, so what's this tomato value here? Well, in the case where a variable is not declared anywhere, right, or if for some reason the reference value is invalid, the second argument passed to the var function acts as a default value for the variable. So, for example, so when the browser loads, the default value of this ball BG custom property will be tomato, which, as some of you know, might be my favorite. Not might be, it is my favorite CSS color. I use it all over the place in my courses. So yep, so variables are in place in your CSS. That looks good. Now over in JavaScript land, I'll set a value for each of these CSS variables that I've defined in the CSS. I'll set them from JavaScript using the set property method. So I want the values to change when I click anywhere inside the body of the page here. So I gave the body an event listener that listens for the click event. So first, to set a position value for the ball each time body is clicked, let me do ball.style.set property. Not that. That's not what I want. VS Code. So ball.style.set property. And so the first argument is the CSS variable, right, or the property you want to update. So in this case, -- position X. And then the second argument is going to be the actual value that you want to set for that property. Let's do e.clientX. So e.clientX is going to return the horizontal coordinate at which the click occurred inside the body, right? So next, I'll set the Y position. So let's do ball.style.set property. This time I want to update -- position Y. And I will set the value of position Y to e.clientX, which provides the vertical coordinate. And finally, let's set the background color of the ball on click with JavaScript. For that, again, ball.style set property. And what's the name of that property? It's ball BG. So we'll pass that to set property. And the second argument, I'm going to set a new background color each time the body is clicked using a random hex value, right? And I'll do that via the value this already written random hex function is going to return So I can call this function here, random hex. All right, fingers crossed. Let's see if this works. So if I click somewhere in the body, we shall see the ball move. That's weird. So it looks like I need to offset the coordinates a little bit to make the translation values a little bit more precise. Oh, yeah, so e.client x, e.client x, that's no bueno. All right, so let's try that again. Yep, indeed. So I'll use some magic numbers here to offset the coordinates, make the translation values a little bit more precise. So let's do e.client x minus 80, e.client y minus 80, and that's going to place the ball, really the center of the ball, exactly where the mouse clicked, right? And you can see the cursor in the center like this. So that's all that's doing. So pretty neat. JavaScript is treating those custom properties like regular CSS properties, and it's updating their values using that second value passed into set property at runtime. Do you have a take on Vue versus React? That's a loaded question. I love both, but I recently using React, and I teach React at Treehouse, so check that out. There's a lot of cool courses in there on React. When will there be an update on CSS Basics? Yeah, it's a little bit early days for that, but it's in the sort of planning phase. We got something in the works, so stay tuned. Awesome. All right, moving on. So here's another sort of demo that I did a while ago. I'm just playing the video for it, but I can send some links. CodePen links. CodePen Guil H. So this other demo uses CSS variables and JavaScript in a similar way, right? It updates the background position property of this background image based on the XY coordinates of the mouse position. The cool thing, it's using the CSS blend mode feature to create that sort of knockout text effect. Here's another one. Yeah, so I should do another live stream where we just build all these cool demos. So this is another direction-aware hover effect on a button. So we have the CSS gradient, right? It's following the cursor as it moves over the button. And JavaScript is keeping track of the position of the mouse, right? And it's using those coordinates to update CSS variables that are set for the button, position and size variables. Yes, let's get into another demo. This is a pretty cool one. It's going to use we're going to use CSS variables to switch between a dark and light mode for content on a page. So let's get into that. That looks like that. All right. So let's see. In a style sheet for this page here, it's just some content and has a checkbox that we're going to use. So I'll start by declaring two variables in the root scope. Let's say dash dash color light and dash dash color dark. Let's set the color light variable to an RGBA 255, 255, 255. 0.87. So it's kind of like a high emphasis white. And color dark, let's say pound 121212. All right. So then right below, I'm going to create two CSS rules for my themes. Let's do theme scope, two new variables to the theme light rule. Let's do dash dash color text. This is my light theme, so I'll define a color text variable here, and then I'm setting its value to reference. I'm going to set its value to reference this color dark variable with var color dark. And then let's set a new, let's declare a new custom property called color BG, and I'll assign this one var color dash light. All right, so in the dark theme rule, I'll invert the colors, right? So let's copy this. So color text will be color light, and color dark will be I changed color dark to color light and then color light to color dark. Just confused myself there a little bit. That looks good. Cool. So now down in the card rule, so this is just some boilerplate CSS to get the page looking fancy dancy. So here in this card rule, I'm going to add the color and background color properties, right, for this card, right? So this is the card, this wrapper here. And I'm going to set a value using var. And what am I going to use? Well, for the color, I'll use color text. And for the background color, bar color BG. Cool. So CSS is looking good. Let's do this. In index.html, I'll set the body's class to theme light initially, keeping this simple. So let's see. That looks good. Theme dash light. Just kidding. There, that looks good. So now over in the land of JavaScript, let's do a few things. So I've already selected the body and checkbox element here and assign them to variables. So once we have references to the elements or nodes, we can start doing stuff with them in JavaScript. So I'll call add event listener on the checkbox, and I want the change event. Good. So now probably a few ways we can do this. I want to toggle between theme dark and theme light classes upon checking this checkbox here, right? Since this is a simple example, I'll go with JavaScript's classlist.toggle method. Let's do that. So inside the event listener, I have the body here. So let's do body.classlist, which is the list of classes, that are assigned to the body in HTML. Like what classes did I give the body? So this property gets them. And we're going to do a little toggling. So what do we want to toggle? Well, let's do theme dark. And let's also pass it body.classlist.toggle theme light. So in other words, if the class is set to theme dark, remove it and set it to theme light. Or if it's set to theme light, replace it with theme dark. So let's check this out. Fingers crossed here. I'll check the box and boom, that changes to the dark theme. Whew. Unchecking it changes it back to the light theme. Awesome. All right. Just a couple more things. That is indeed what we just created. Moving on. All right, so another really, really fun part of CSS variables is that they can also be set and updated and altered inline within the attributes of any HTML element. That's sort of how alive they are in the browser, right? And because of this, you can use CSS variables to modify both the style and presentational attributes of inline SVG, right? You can style and modify the attributes of SVG inline. That's what I was trying to say. So they could, for example, help you create easily customizable SVG icons, right? Which we do a lot in front-end web development. So yeah, time for another fun demo. So we're going to work with this SVG symbol element here. And what that does is define a reusable template of a heart icon, right? So the symbol here is made up of two path elements. So let's say that I want to give each icon some color, right? And some depth using fill colors. So one path will have a light fill, another a darker fill, kind of like this, right? We have this darker fill on the left and lighter fill on the right. So here we have a red, green, and blue heart. So you've seen, you've seen that how you can update them from CSS and from your style sheet, for example. Well, now we're going to update them. We're going to declare them on HTML elements in HTML file. So let me bring that up. So first, you can see the SVG here in the HTML file. Now, to create the fill colors, I'll give each path element here a fill attribute. And I'll set the top path fill to, let's say, var dash dash, let's call it secondary fill. And then I'll set the second path here to var primary fill. Now, below, notice how I'm using these use elements 3 times, right? 1, 2, 3 here, to copy or sort of instantiate this symbol. So what this does is it creates, as you can see in the browser right here, right here. So it creates 3 separate instances, right, of the heart symbol, and they're all sized differently and all that. But notice that the parent SVG of each instance has a different class, right? We have, this SVG here with the class heart red. This one has the class heart green, and then this one heart blue. So when you reuse SVG graphics with this use element, it inherits CSS styles from its parent context. Now we haven't declared the variables anywhere yet, so let's do that in a style sheet. So I have the rules already declared here. So I'm going to scope the primary and secondary fill variables locally, right, inside each of these parent classes, and set them to my desired color. So first, heart red, well, that was primary fill, right? Yeah, so let's do primary fill. We'll set that to, let's say, C44, and then dash dash secondary fill. And that will be, let's say, D3, 5, F, 5F. I'm not making these up. I have these pre-written. I'm not that good with hex values in my head. So, yep, that looks good. So let's do heart green. I'll just copy these and change them. So in the heart green rule, primary fill will be a little different. Let's say 41 AF 5D. And then, not to bore you with hex values here, let's do another one. 5 ECE 7F. One more set of hex colors. Primary fill and secondary fill for heart blue, right? The smaller icon. So here let's say 2E F and secondary fill 38 ACD 0. All right, cool. So what's going to happen here? Well, the icons are going to inherit the color values from their parent, right? And as a result, we get 3 colorful icons, right? Where each path is set to a different fill color. So it's really neat and efficient, right? Let me bump this up here. So yep, that's exactly what I wanted. You can also use var as values for, let's do a stroke width first of 2. And then I'll set a stroke property on it, stroke attribute on it. So then here, let's give it the primary fill variable. So I'll just copy it from here, and that's all set. So the variable, hopefully, yep, it sets each stroke color using the value assigned in the parent class. Now let's make it a little darker. So let's do primary fill. There we go. So now each of these SVGs is going to set the stroke color using that primary fill variable. Cool. All right. almost done here. This is going by quickly. So you know, a lot of cool demos so far, a lot of neat use cases for CSS variables. You've seen how they work, and you know, how the var function works and how custom properties themselves work. So maybe you should also know like where they do not work and a few best practices for using them. So first, var, the var function itself, is invalid if it's used in a selector or as a selector. This is not going to work, and it's actually invalid syntax. The var function is also not valid as a property name, as you can see here. The value here has no connection to the variable. You also can't reference the CSS variable with var in a media query expression, which I wish you could. It's kind of a bummer, but it seems like there's been some recent developments that might address this. There's this new spec I'm not going to get into. It's called CSS environment variables, and it'll make something like this work, so stay tuned. What else? Well, you can't use the var function to create a length value like this, right? You can't do like var m. This is invalid. So again, use calc if you want to build your length values using var, as I looked at earlier. Finally, CSS variable names are case sensitive. So for example, each of these three main brand variables are completely different variables, right? Because of how they're written. Each one means a different value to the browser. So make sure you know, casing is important. Cool, yeah, so you can do so much more with animations and responsive layouts and so on and so on and so on. And CodePen is a just great resource where you can check out CSS variable demos for just about any use case. You know, just search CSS variables or custom properties, and all these awesome demos are going to come up. You can spend hours and hours just checking them out, which I encourage you to do that. So, you know, they're really awesome feature, as you just saw, and incredibly useful. So I suggest that you just experiment with them if you haven't yet, and begin using them in your projects. So I provided a tiny glimpse into some of the cool and fun things you can do with CSS variables, but that's about all the time I have for now. I do have some questions. Let's see. SVG scales no matter what device, right? And stays crisp. And indeed it does. SVG is that's why I use them for icons and all sorts of fancy graphics. But Guil, in your JavaScript in the DOM course, what technology do you use to show the animation of traversing the DOM? I really don't. It's just vanilla CSS and JavaScript. No libraries or anything. It's all just native code to the browser. Cool. Any other questions? You know, again, you can learn CSS, front-end web development, full-stack JavaScript, and lots more at teamtreehouse.com. So be sure to check out the free trial we have going on there. I'm Guil H on the Twitters if you want to follow me. I also post some demos and some tips for front-end web and JavaScript-related things. Yeah, and the next Treehouse stream is going to be tomorrow with our instructor, and more. He's going to go over how to build fully responsive and accessible layouts with CSS, some cool grid and Flexbox demos there. So I'll be checking that out myself. So again, yes, thanks so much for tuning in, everyone. This was a lot of fun. So stay safe and code happily.